Hello there again, everybody. This is Steve Bishop, and I'm going to be continuing our series in Programming in Access 2013. And in our first lesson, we went over creating this table, our first employees table. And we have our different values here, and you may have already said, well, wait a minute, okay. He's got age in here, and age is something that's going to change every year because obviously everybody gets older. So is the database going to automatically figure out that the age changes? How is that possible? Well, you're already correct in thinking about that because this is not something that's going to be tracked by the database unless we specifically create some programming to compensate and adjust and change this. And we don't really necessarily want to do that. Instead, we may probably want to go with DOB, date of birth. Let's change this to the date of birth instead. Because we're changing it from the age to date of birth, we probably also want to change the data type from a numerical data type to a date and time. And you're probably already saying to yourself, well, wait a minute. He doesn't need to know the time that somebody is born. I mean, I can't even remember I don't know what time I was born. I know what date I was born, but I don't know exactly the date and time of my birth. So how do you adjust for the fact that you only want the date part and not the time? Well, luckily for us, Access gives us these other fields down here, which gives us the format, input mask, caption, default value, and several of these other things. And you'll notice that if I click on a cell over here to the right, you'll see this text over here gives us an idea of what each one of these fields are for. So under the format of the date and time type, I can click on the drop down and you'll notice that I can keep track of the general date, which is both the date and time, the long date, which is the full date name, given a Thursday, November 12, 2015. Medium date is kind of a truncated version with NOV. You've probably seen that version. Short date is the one that we want, but you can also keep track of the time in these other three different types of formats. So this becomes very handy if you want to specify. I may not want the date, maybe I just want the time, so you can select one of these different types of times. But I'm going to pick short date because that's the one that's all I really need, is just that particular date. Input mask. Well, you're probably wondering, what the heck is input mask? It's a pattern for all data to be entered into this field. So you want to specify that, hey, this particular short date, you'll notice, has a particular format. It has this 11 /12/1215. That's a format. And when you enter the data, you have a specific format you want that data to match up to. So that's where input mask comes in handy. If I click on this, it's going to ask me to save it. I'm going to go ahead and click yes, and it gives us this little handy wizard. And I want the short date. And you can create your own by clicking onto the edit list. I'm not going to get into that. If you want to explore that, you certainly can. Generally, if it's not already a default, I don't really use it because you can do a lot of this other validation and input stuff through VBA. So I rarely actually deal with this too much. But for displaying to you, I want to show you how this process works here. Short date is what I'm going to select. I'm going to click next. It's already got a design of the input mask, a placeholder character. Click on next and finish, and we're done. Now we have an input mask for us. Caption. This is important. I rarely ever use a caption for my table column name when it comes to this particular thing, and that's because this can get very confusing. I just want to show you, for example, here. If I change, since this is, notice we have DOB, which stands for date of birth. So let's say I gave it a caption of date of birth. And I'll show you. I'm going to flip on over. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to flip over to the data entry view, and you'll notice that it now says date of birth here. Well, the problem is that that's the caption and not the name of my field. And if later on down the road I needed to grab a value from this date of birth field, and I try to use date of birth because that's what it says on my table when I look it up, I try to use date of birth as the field that I'm going to get information from, I'd be wrong. And it would give me an error, and I'd wonder why. Well, that's because the name of the field is actually DOB. So when I'm going in and programming, I should use DOB, not date of birth. So that's why I rarely ever give it a caption when it comes to the table. It can just get really confusing. A default value, one of the neat little things, you'll find this little special expression builder, gives you typical functions, built-in functions of a date and time. I'm just going to go ahead and use the one that I already know, which is called date. Okay, and this is a VBA expression. This is a VBA function that Access uses in order to get today's date. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and that will give us a default value for this field of today's date, and we'll actually see that in use here. I'm not going to get into the validation rule and validation text, but obviously you can probably determine what that means. You have an expression that limits the value that can be entered into the field. Press F1 for help on the validation rules. And that's also something very helpful to know. You can press, if you enter into any one of these fields, you can hit F1, and that will bring up a help menu or take you to the help website for Access for that particular thing. If we need to run into that, and I need to show you where some help is, we'll kind of come by that naturally. I'm not going to get into that too much right now, but just understand that there are validation rules and text that you can put on the data that goes in here. Another really important field to understand is required. Is this field required? I'm going to say for right now, yes, absolutely, it is required. And I think the default value for these is no. But I'm going to say yes, we definitely want this field, the date of birth, to be required because we need to know when how old our employees are to make sure no one's underage and that everybody's working at appropriate age. So these other things, indexed, IME mode, sentence mode, these are more complex things that we're not going to get into in this series, at least for right now. But just you probably will want to investigate the indexed part because this can help speed up your databases, and that can become important later on. I'm not going to get into that in this series though. Text alignment is just what you would think. How is it going to be aligned? Left, center, right, distribute, which is, I guess, justify. And should you show the date picker for dates? Yes, I'm going to say for my date, yes, I do want to see the date picker. And you'll notice that these will change based upon the data type that you've picked. I have a field size, I have, again, the format, default values, etc. because I have different field sizes. And you'll notice the auto number has very little in the way of different options for that particular data type. And the last one I'm going to show you here is I'm going to go to the wage, and I'm going to say the default wage for my employees is $10. Okay, so that's the last change that I'm going to make on this table for right now. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then we'll move on in our next video.